It looks like there was some sort of explosion or fire, and this is from inside the plane, taken by somebody on board, showing that the oxygen mask came down, most likely at the exact time that that engine explosion happened. We're already hearing some preliminary information about possible injuries on board. We are certainly looking into that. This is a live picture of the Philadelphia airport, and you can see that that jet is still on the tarmac right now. We at this point believe most all of the passengers have been taken off the flight, and of course they're trying to determine exactly what caused this engine to malfunction, leading to this emergency landing. We continue to follow this story, and as we get more information, we will certainly pass it on to you.
And other stories we're working on at this noon. Authorities are investigating the suspicious death of a 2-year-old boy. This happened.
International Airport. What you're looking at is a picture on Twitter of the engine that was the issue. Looks like there may have been an explosion, a fire. We don't know exactly yet what happened with that engine, but clearly it was very serious. The flight making that emergency landing in Philadelphia, it's still on the tarmac right now. Passengers, we believe, all off the plane at this point. And of course, we're seeking more information to find out about possible injuries and what else may have occurred. And of course, the fear. Can you imagine the fear for those passengers on board? We'll be back after this. In the last half hour shows passengers inside the plane, a passenger applying his oxygen mask. Passengers do say that the engine that blew out actually sent shrapnel into the plane, possibly damaging a window and injuring a passenger. Of course, we're still looking into that. This is the picture from Twitter, though, that shows damage to the engine of that plane. As you can see, it is severe damage to that engine.
For the oxygen mask to be deployed, that meant that clearly they were depressurizing at that point. The plane was headed to Dallas at the time. We're going to have a full report for you at ABC7NY starting just minutes from now. So if you want more, check us out there.
And good afternoon to you. I'm Diana Williams with Ken Rosado, and of course we continue to follow this very important breaking news. A Southwest Airlines jet that took off from LaGuardia Airport forced to make an emergency landing at Love Field in Philadelphia. This was after one engine actually broke apart. You're looking at a live picture right now of that Southwest flight. It is still on the tarmac. You can see the engine that had the failure there, and you can see the foam still around that engine. That plane making this emergency landing, and every passenger at this point we know off that flight. We're still waiting to hear about the condition of those passengers.
Yeah, usually they deploy that foam when there's some kind of fire,
right.
And you could see based on the damage to that jet on the left wing of that Southwest flight. Again, that is Southwest 1380 going from LaGuardia to Dallas. This all happening in the last hour. You could see that there's quite an extensive amount of damage, and we're told that even shrapnel that was coming off of that engine at such a high speed actually penetrated the cabin of the plane.
And the name for that is an uncontained engine failure, and that it means that pieces of that engine, rather than being contained within the engine casing, those pieces actually came out of that engine. We understand that part of a window may have been broken. There you go. You see the picture here.
Wow.
It was broken. A passenger sitting there was impacted by that. You can see there that the mast came down because of the actual air pressure in that plane changing so suddenly, so drastically, and so the mast came down, and that's when, you know, the pilot obviously had to make a quick and very fast decision to get that plane back on the ground as quickly as possible.
Aviation expert J.P. Tristani joins us now on the phone. J.P., when a plane is leaving from LaGuardia to go to Dallas and you're over Philadelphia, would you be at cruising altitude yet? How high would he have been at that point?
Well, he diverted to Philadelphia, but I can see from his graph on a playback that he reached an altitude of 33,000 feet. And then I can see from the graph that he executed an emergency descent, probably because if the masts were deployed, which come out at 14,000 feet, that he was up at 33,000. He got a perforation in the cabin that caused an emergency pressurization loss. It could have been instantaneously, but I think it was probably more slower because the picture I see of the passenger with an oxygen mask on his face doesn't show anything insofar as wind damage or the flying about that you would have with the fog and temperature coldness if it were a total decompression at altitude.
JP, what would the experience be like for those passengers sitting around that window when that window was smashed?
Well, it's got to be sheer fear, Diana. If a window is smashed, it also has the possibility and the very good capability of a passenger who would not be with his seatbelt on to actually be sucked out of that aircraft. That has happened. So any damage to the fuselage that is of a hole of the size of a window, trust me, it can fit a passenger through there.
Now, JP, if a window blows on a plane, normally because of the pressure of the plane, it would blow out, correct?
No, if it got impacted by this uncontained engine failure, it could also blow inward because if you crack the window, although I don't see much on that, I think maybe the surrounding portions of the window were perforated by the engine fan blades and things that came off that engine.
JP, how often do you have an uncontained engine failure like this where a hull or a part of the plane is actually perforated?
That's extremely rare, Diane. It's only happened a few times because engines are designed so that any failure of an explosive nature are contained. What you never want is an uncontained failure that could obviously cause this type of problem. So it is a very rare occurrence that you would have that explosion occur that actually shrapnel perforated the cabin.
JP, the left side of the plane lost hydraulics, we're understanding, because of the engine damage. What happens in that case? Can the pilot carefully control that plane, or is it much more difficult to manage a landing?
No, it's no problem at all with that. And obviously, because he made a proper single-engine landing, they never deployed the chutes. You had 143 passengers on board and 5 crew members. And so with the hydraulics available for the other side of the aircraft and also available that you bring on the auxiliary power unit, you've got total control over the aircraft. There are no limitations. The only problem is trimming the aircraft up for a normal landing. And from what I see, the landing was a textbook, proper emergency single-engine landing, totally within the capabilities of the twin-engine aircraft.
JP, any chance there was any advance warning? Would there have been flame shooting out of that engine, perhaps? Would there have been any advance notice that there was something wrong for that pilot?
Yes, there could have been a warning on the total temperature gauges. There could have been a rise in them. There could have been an oral warning within the cockpit of a fire. And then prior or just as they were executing the emergency drill to contain the engine and shut it down, then the accumulation of either fire or jet fuel caused the explosion. So they could have been behind it, or, quite frankly, Diana, it could have been instantaneously.
How would you rank the actions of these pilots on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, looking at the chart and seeing the altitude of 33,000 and seeing the descent angle, it looks to me like it was a textbook descent. The oxygen mask deployed at altitude, you must get down. Those are not positive pressure oxygen masks. In other words, you can't breathe with those masks on if they stayed up at 30,000 feet because your lungs were reversed. So basically, they have to get down within 2.5 minutes. We demonstrate that all the time in the simulator. In an emergency descent, you must get below 15,000 feet within that 2.5 minute time frame, and that is so that the passengers really can breathe. And it appears to me, looking at the graph, looking at the aircraft landing, there were no chutes deployed. The people were coming down the normal air stairs. It looks to me like the pilots and crew did a perfect job.
That's good to hear. JP, when you talk about that descent, he was at 33,000 going down to, you say, 15,000. How quickly did he do that? And it was nose down on that descent, right?
Well, what you do, Diana, it's just about max speed, max rated descent. It could be, you'll set up anywhere between 6 to 10,000 foot per minute rate of descent, but demonstrated you must do it in the simulator by FAA regulations within 2 minutes. From altitude, whether you're up at 38,000, 40,000, but above 30,000. And so that's pretty much, and it looks to me like from the time that he started his descent at 15:05, and it looks like he got below 15,000 feet within that time frame. It looks like he's made it very easily.
Boy, and
but,
obviously
that rate of descent, yeah, you peg it out at maximum airspeed, speed breaks out, and you come down at anywhere between 6,000 to 8,000 feet, right at the limits of the speeds.
Wow.
So that's like 500 miles an hour you're talking about, going down at that speed?
Yeah, you'd be pushing right up at the barber pole speed, as we call it. And so if that's above 30,000 feet, it would be a Mach number of around 7 or 8.0. Transitions going through 22,000. That indicated airspeed would easily be up at 450, 500.
Wow. So I'm sure, JP, as the afternoon goes on and into the evening, we're going to be hearing from some of those passengers who were on board that flight. And I just, in my head, am imagining what it must have been. It must have been just the most frightening experience for them. And I know all of them are so grateful to be on the ground, many of them back safe and sound, but we do have some reports that there may be some injuries. We don't know the extent of them yet, but we hope to learn more as the afternoon goes on.
I've only read about one passenger being taken off the aircraft in an ambulance. Mm-hmm. But yes, Diana, it's an explosive decompression at altitude also involves freezing temperatures, 30 below zero, and ice fog. But it does not appear like this was an explosive decompression, but more of a contained decompression with the cabin rapidly rising up to 30,000 plus feet. But the pilots had it well in hand from the angle of descent that I can see on the graph.
But all the more reason, JP, when they tell you on the overhead, if you are seated, make sure your seatbelt is on, even if the seatbelt indicator doesn't say so. This proves why, correct?
I always instructed my passengers that in your seats, remain with your seatbelt securely fastened, and I always emphasized secure, not loosely fastened.
Right. Yep, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in that too, JP.
Yes, hard lessons to learn about that.
Yeah. Okay, listen, JP, thanks so much. Don't go away quite yet. We've got Jim Hoffer available to us right now. And Jim, can you talk a little bit about the Ntsb investigation? Because that's going to start right now, right?
Well, yes, I think should first start off by saying that, Southwest Airlines has a pretty darn good record. I mean, they've been in operation for nearly 50 years, and they've not lost a single passenger or crew member in millions and millions and millions of flights. There have been injuries in the past. Of course, there was an accident with a very hard landing in 2013 here at LaGuardia of a Southwest airline. That hard landing actually broke the nose gear of the plane, and several passengers had some minor injuries. But for the most part, this Southwest Airlines has an incredible record of no fatalities of passengers or crews in 50 years of operation. But a couple of things I think that the NTSB is going to look closely at, of course, is that appearance of that engine. One of the things you notice right away is that the cow or the collar of the engine is missing. Now, what caused that? Did a fan blade break off first and then start the breaking up of the engine, or did the collar break initially? Because back in August 2016, very similar incident, that the collar of the engine on a Southwest Airline jet broke off, and that plane had to make an emergency landing. It was out of New Orleans, but it made an emergency landing in Pensacola, Florida. No injuries. But there again, what happened is that collar of the engine broke off. They lost complete engine power in the number one engine, and they had to make an emergency landing. So I think that's one thing that's going to be looked at closely, that collar of that engine. What's interesting, though, is that on these 737s, 700s, they have a built-in fire extinguishing basically mechanics within it that JP can correct me here if I'm wrong, but I believe the pilots in the cockpit can activate this fire extinguishing and have fire retardant spread throughout that engine when a fire starts to keep that engine fire from spreading, particularly spreading to the tanks that are under the wing and near the engine.
JP, are you still on the line here? Can you confirm that?
Yep, we have all engines, in fact, not just this peculiar engine. We have two bottles of foam, an air or nitrogen combination that can be discharged, one bottle, two bottles, and it's a fire suppressant. And that's part of the normal emergency shutdown procedure. You shut off the fuel line, and then you fire the bottles.
Wow. Jim, you've covered a lot of these. You've seen a lot of these kind of accidents. I know we're reaching out to track down passengers, but what are your thoughts about what was going on inside that plane when this happened?
Well, I mean, look, usually I know when I'm on a plane and there's a heavy turbulence, I get really, really nervous. I can't even imagine something like this. I mean, I think what goes through everyone's mind is that this could be it. But you hope that the professional crew, the flight crew, the attendants, that everyone stays calm. It certainly seems like the pilots did all of the right things. And you can only hope that people have that faith in the pilots. But it must have been pretty horrific for at least the first few minutes of that.
Absolutely. JP, your final thoughts?
I agree with Jim. And even as a pilot and having had emergency descents, I don't discount the fact that the passengers should be concerned back there, and I recognize that they would be fearful. But that is a pass-fail demonstration for your FAA check ride and that emergency descent. And from what I see here, that aircraft landed safely. They didn't blow the doors. They didn't blow the chutes. Passengers disembarked exactly as they would normally down the air stairs and onto a bus, not into the thinger. So I don't discount that passengers are frightened. If I were back there as a non-pilot, I would be concerned just as much as anybody else.
But as they say, JP, any landing you could walk away from is a good landing, correct?
Exactly right. Yeah. And they walked away from a good landing.
Amen to that. All right, that was Southwest Flight 1380 from LaGuardia to Dallas, emergency landing due to that engine failure you're looking at right there. They are safely on the ground now in Philadelphia. Our AJ Ross is headed to Philadelphia right now. She'll have live reports through the day here on Channel 7 and at ABC 7 NY.
And of course, we're going to have more coming up on First at 4, Eyewitness News at 5 and 6. As warranted. Thank you for watching this very special webcast on ABC 7 NY. And thank you for joining us.